Good morning, everyone. My name is Nicole Pazos, and today I will be working with you on Chapter 1, pages 17 through 42. The topic is the importance of communication, and I will be using the book, so you want to be an interpreter if you would like to follow along with the lesson. But before we dive into the lesson, I wanted to share an interesting quote that I found that pertains to this subject matter. The quote is from Mark Pagel, and he says, "Each of you possess the most powerful, dangerous, and subversive trait that natural selection has ever devised. It's a piece of neural audio technology for rewiring other people's minds. I'm talking about your language." Let's begin. So I'm on page 17 right now if you want to follow along. If not, no worries. You can just follow along here on the PowerPoint. So first thing I want to mention is right here, box 1. It says language is powerful. It shapes and mirrors the perception of its users. So what does that actually mean? That means that language is subjective. That means that everyone's language is generally based upon their perception of life and or their experiences that they have had. It is subjective to the listener and the user as well. Number 2, there are several communication patterns that make an individual seem less powerful when talking. And in box number 3, we have here hedges, hesitations, intensifiers, polite forms, tag questions, and disclaimers, all of which we will be getting into. So first I want to talk about hedges. So the definition of a hedge is a qualifier that weakens the statement, okay? So what does that mean? That means that essentially a hedge is like a buffer, okay? It makes something not so nice come off sounding not too bad, if that makes sense, okay? So for example, I have here a sentence: I guess I wouldn't mind going out to eat. If you can guess the buffer, where would you guess? I kind of gave you the answer, right? I guess I wouldn't mind, okay? So that makes that sentence sound less brash, I suppose. So if we can read through the lines of the statement, we would probably formulate that this person really doesn't want to go out to eat. They're just going, maybe to keep the other person company. Next, hesitations. So a hesitation is a filler preceding or during an utterance, okay? So right here, all right, that's a filler, or a hesitation rather. Every single language has their own fillers, even including sign language. So the purpose of a filler or a hesitation is to let the listener know that you are not done speaking. So for example, if I said, so tomorrow I'm going to the beach, and after that we're going to go out to dinner, you would know by me saying and that my statement is not finished just by saying tomorrow we're going to the beach. You know, with the and the that I'm probably processing my thoughts a little bit. I'm trying to get my words together, and then I would tell you the remaining part of that sentence. So this allows the person to know, hey, they're not done. Let me give them a minute, and then you continue your sentence, okay? So an intensifier. What is it? So an intensifier is really unnecessary modifiers used within the sentence. So for example, I'm so very honored. Now the intensifier in this sentence is so and very, okay? But if you look at the sentence, if we take out so and very, can we get the same point across? I'm honored. Yes, you can, all right? Unfortunately, intensifiers generally obscure messages and make them seem more intense, hence the word intensifiers, than they really ought to be. Next, polite forms. I'm not going to go into too much detail with this. Polite forms: thank you, please, excuse me, that's all verbiage that we use, when we're trying to have a, polite conversation with somebody, okay? Tag questions happens to be my favorite. So a tag question is a question that is tacked onto the end of a statement, okay? So for example, we should move, shouldn't we? So the statement is we should move. The tag question is shouldn't we? Now we can very well say we should move, shouldn't we? Or I'm sorry, we could say shouldn't we move, and get the same point across, right? So that's the difference between a question and a tag question. A tag question starts off with a statement in the beginning and then leads to the tag question at the end. Next is a disclaimer, okay? So a disclaimer pretty much just eliminates personal responsibility from the speaker, okay? And because it eliminates responsibility, that means what? That means that I can pretty much say whatever I want and I don't have to take responsibility for it. I mean, not always, but that's the gist of it. The other thing that I want to mention is we see disclaimers everywhere. So I watched this show called Impractical Jokers. You may have seen it. It's about 4 guys. They pretty much just, do funny jokes on each other and things like that. But they have a disclaimer at the beginning of the show. And this disclaimer states that they are not responsible that if you decide to engage in any of these same actions that they have done. Okay, so that eliminates the responsibility on their behalf and it puts the responsibility therefore on you. Let's move on. So we have powerful versus powerless speech. First box, I need an appointment with Mr. Choi, preferably today. Versus, I kind of need to see Mr. Choi. It's really important. So if you were to look at these 2 boxes, which one do you think would be powerful versus powerless? Well, if you guess the first box, you're correct. That is a powerful statement, okay? The last box is a powerless statement. Reason being is because they're using intensifiers, really, and they're also using hesitations, both of which are forms that convey powerless speech versus powerful. Next. Responsible language. So there's 2 different ways that we use responsible language. So we have I, you, and it statements, which place personal responsibility on either to ourselves or onto another individual, and or it can avoid the responsibility as well. Another one for the avoidance statement is but, and we'll get in further detail with that. So the word you, it reflects the place, you reflects place on judgment of the person being addressed. So you ran the red light, it's your fault. I'm placing blame on the other individual. I reflects personal responsibility. I'm sorry, I made a mistake, I take responsibility, okay? The responsibility is then on me. It reflects the attempt to avoid responsibility. So for example, it wasn't my fault. I'm deflecting responsibility onto maybe another individual. Okay, moving on. Next is but statement. So but is a word that is used to join 2 statements. Therefore, when joined, it cancels or limits the statement preceding. So this can also be looked upon as a hedge because it is used to soften the actual message. And also this allows the individual to avoid personal responsibility. Next. Okay, the 5 different linguistic registers of sign are frozen, formal, consultative, informal, and intimate, all of which we will get into shortly. Okay, so every language has its own register, okay? This is a great thing, actually, because it enables the speaker to modify the language and the levels of formality that is being used. And so as far as degrees of the language, so we have to know what the register determines. So if I'm screaming, you might determine that I'm mad. If I'm talking softly, you might determine that, I'm kind of relaxed or, things like that. Each language has its own turn-taking rules, complexity and completeness, choice of vocabulary, volume, fillers, and allowable topics, all of which we will get into. All right, so lower English register. So you're going to see this type of language used maybe in somebody that's just learning a language. So for English, you'll see these features throughout the language. So for example, the first one is I'd, which is known as a contraction. What if, gotta, and shoulda, those are called phonetic assimilations. In English, it is also known as canatives, okay? Again, this is a hesitation, and I should have said, these are corrections that you will see grammatically and linguistically in English. Next, we're going to start talking about the registers of sign language. So first is frozen, okay? So the frozen feature, you will see this in things that are more ritualistic or archaic. So the Lord's Prayer, the national anthem, oaths, the Miranda rights, okay? So for the frozen feature, register, There's no turn taking involved. That means there's nobody conversing back and forth. The sentence structure is generally complex and sometimes archaic, which means that the language that is being used is generally old-fashioned, language that we do not use today, like thou art, things like that. Okay, the vocabulary, again, is formal and it is archaic, old-fashioned. Okay, the volume speed, if we're signing, it is larger, and if you are verbally speaking, it is slower than the normal speed. The topics allowed are limited, such as the Lord's Prayer, national anthem, oaths, Miranda rights, things that just have to stay the same based upon historical features, really. Okay, moving on. Formal. So formal, we have turn taking. Okay, it is limited, but it is controlled. All right. The sentence structure is generally complex and compound. The vocabulary is formal, hence formal register. And the topics allowed are very impersonal. So where you will see this type of register is will be in sports arenas, auditoriums, theaters, and churches. Consultative. So this is a great one, and this involves an individual and an expert. Okay, we'll see this used with lawyers and clients, teachers and students, doctors and patients. As we see here, the lawyer, that's the expert, the client's the individual, the teacher, the expert, the student's the individual, doctor, the expert, patient is the individual, so on and so forth. Okay, so the rules for this type of register for the turn taking is restrained but active. Okay, the sentence structure is fully formed. Vocabulary, generally technical jargon. Lawyers will use law terms, teachers will use educational terms, doctors will use medical terms. The volume and speed is generally conversational. Okay, and the speed and rate and citing space is just a normal conversation. And again, the topics allowed are professional. So lawyer, teacher, doctors, those are all professional settings. Therefore, the conversation will allude to the professionalism of that individual or the expertise of that individual. Next, we have informal and casual. Okay, so the turn-taking rules there is fluid with interruptions allowed. The sentence structure is generally fragments with some run-ons. The vocabulary is generally informal. The volume speed is very relaxed. And the topics allowed, personal. So you're going to use an informal casual setting with your neighbors, your coworkers, your friends, your family, your peers, anybody really that you are an equal with, you'll generally use this type of dialogue with. Next, intimate register. So disclaimer that just because you see the word intimate does not mean that the individuals are having physical relations with each other, okay? So I'm going to lay that out before I get into this. All right, so the turn-taking rules are interruptions. They are very common in this register. The sentence structure, incomplete sentences are acceptable. Vocabulary, some lexicon, they have personal messages and meanings involved, and volume is speed. Is really just small, and sometimes words or signs are not required, because sometimes when you're speaking with somebody on an intimate level, body language is enough. You should know somebody fairly well if you're going to have an intimate register with them, I would hope. And the topics allowed are generally personal. Okay, so you're going to use this register exchange with your children, your parents, your spouse, families, close friends, things of that sort, people who really know you on a personal, intimate level. All right, so now I would like to recap with you guys on what we just went over. Okay, so I don't have anything on the screen because I just want to kind of reiterate what I just said. So communication, it takes place between two or more people who sometimes share cultural or experiential and linguistic backgrounds. Okay, communication is very complex and imprecise. So we all make errors when we speak, always, because language really is an imperfect thing. Okay. Communication is also linked to culture. So it's important that if you're learning another language that you do assimilate yourself with the culture. That way the nuances, the do's and don'ts, those things are very, very important. All right. Communication is always made up of constructed messages, including linguistics elements. Could be words, signs, nonverbal, facial expressions, things of that sort, okay? Communication is transactional, okay? So what does that mean? It means that the conversation is taking place between two people that are sharing information with one another, okay? And as a role of an interpreter, it's very important that you understand the nature of communication and the role as the mediator of communication between two people while you are interpreting. Let's talk a little bit about messages and how they are constructed. So to convey an idea or to ask a question with another individual, you have to use a combination of speech, or if we're using sign, and signs, okay? Messages are influenced by where they are. So the person of whom they are communicating with, the reasons, the goals that are accomplished or are to be accomplished in this setting, okay? Messages also encompass a number of features. So the signer or speaker's goals, the context, the degree of directness, okay? You know, euphemisms, abstractions, passive voice. Again, for the messages, we can even talk about powerful and powerless speeches, where we have hedges, hesitations, intensifiers, polite forms, tag questions, and disclaimers, okay? So that is the end of the lesson. I hope you enjoy it, as did I, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Thank you so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.